Okay, hello everyone. This is Becky DeGrosso at counselingwise.com, and I have Dr. April Benson with me today. April, are you there?
I am, Becky.
Perfect, good. All right, and I just want to, before we dive in, I want to check to make sure that everybody can see the presentation and hear me, and I know there will be a little delay here. So if you can just type in the chat, yes, I can hear you, or something, that would be wonderful. I guess it's afternoon for Cheryl, huh? Guess you East Coast folks, it's kind of getting a little late there, huh? All right, if you can hear me, go ahead and type into the chat. That would be great. Just want to make sure before we dive in here that we're being heard. Okay, Megan says yes. Okay, Kevin says yes. Anna says yes. Perfect. All right, we will assume it's working then. Okay, so today's webinar is Narrow Private Practice Niche, How One Psychologist is Making It Work. And said psychologist is April Benson, who's with me here today. And so we're going to dive into the presentation. I do have the chat open, so if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, feel free to go ahead and type your question into the chat. And at the end of the presentation, we'll go in and we will be reviewing all those questions, and April and I will be happy to answer them. So just know that we aren't going to be stopping the presentation to answer your questions, but I am happy to get all your answers to you at the end of the presentation. So here we go. This presentation today is for you if you have a niche or specialty that is not traditional, but you want to market it, okay? And this seems to be coming up more and more for me. I have a number of therapists who are maybe tired of the local therapy scene, have a niche or specialty that they're really passionate about, and they want to market it on a national level or even locally if there's enough interest in that. So this presentation is for you if you're in that boat. It's for you if you want to establish yourself as an expert in that niche, either nationally or locally. And if you want to attract people, of course, what I just said, nationally and even perhaps internationally. What you'll hear from April today is that she does have an international audience and she has international clients. So that's a great opportunity when you go narrow and you go wide in terms of your reach. So let me just talk for a second about some examples of narrow niches. One, of course, is helping people with shopping addiction or compulsive buying, and that is, in fact, April's niche, and so you'll hear a lot about that today. Another example is perhaps helping cancer survivors deal with the emotional healing. You know, having your life threatened by cancer is a pretty big deal, and there's a lot of folks who get through that, but they have a lot of emotional baggage that they want to work through. Maybe helping type 2 diabetes sufferers manage their emotional life to manage their diabetes. Okay, I've had someone talk with me about that one. Helping adults who were adopted as children, perhaps. Okay, so these are just examples. Another one is perhaps support for parents of children with ADHD. And, you know, this can go on and on and on. So you, of course, may have your own niche in mind. These are just some examples to let you know the types of things that we're talking about. And if you have a question about your specific niche and whether or not you think you can market that, keep that in mind as we go through here and talk about various ways to do it. See if you think it'll work for your niche, and certainly ask any questions if you have them. So the challenges of a narrow niche are that you often need to market to a larger geography than your city, right? For instance, you know, if you are only limiting yourself to your city and you're doing something like, you know, helping type 2 diabetes folks, well, you may not have enough folks in your target audience locally who would be interested in order to make this a viable business for you. So you may have to go national, you may have to go international, and that's totally okay because the steps are pretty much the same, all right? Another challenge is that if your niche isn't traditional or common or what we're used to in the traditional therapy field, then referrals from usual sources are often harder to come by, okay? So other therapists may not refer as much, other medical folks may not refer as much. The normal folks, they just aren't going to relate to your niche as much. Another challenge is that you may have to take on more of an educator role in your marketing than other therapists do. For instance, people really know already what depression is, right? And so there's some education you can do, which is, of course, very helpful to people, but you might not have to be as much of an educator in a traditional niche as you would in one that's very narrow. People may not understand, for instance, the impact of the emotional impact of surviving cancer, for instance. They may doubt their own issues as being valid. They may be saying, well, I survived this, what's my problem? And educating them on the fact that it is a huge impact is something that you're probably going to have to do. April has had to do a lot of education in her niche, and she'll talk about that. And so this is something that is just part and parcel of taking on a non-traditional narrow niche. The final thing is you may actually find resistance from other therapists about your issue that you're addressing being a real problem. Okay, I know that April has really faced that. She talks about compulsive buying or shopping addiction being the smiled upon affliction. And, everyone says, oh, I'm going to go do shopping therapy. There's a lot of folks, other therapists included, who didn't take it very seriously in the beginning, and some still don't. So that is something that you may have to contend with your niche. Now, the good news is that you can still do this, okay? It can be done. You can still have a viable practice with a narrow niche, and as you'll hear today, it's often very rewarding. Okay, you can become the expert in the niche. That's the cool thing. Okay, try to become the national expert in depression. That's a pretty hard challenge there, right? Because it's so overrun and it's so competitive. But if you have a narrow niche and you have something you're really passionate about, you can become the expert. So that's pretty neat. You can also blaze your own trail. Okay, there's not a standard set of marketing activities to do or expectations, because there's so many expectations for these traditional niches in terms of what you should be doing to market yourself, what you can and can't say, who you can and can't get referrals from. And so with this, you can totally blaze your own trail. You can do whatever works for you. And you will have to actively market yourself to make it work. Okay, that is one thing that we know. There's no way that you're going to take something that's less known and that's non-traditional and sit back and be passive about it, maybe just with a website up. You are going to have to actively market yourself. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, I realize that for many people this could be pretty scary, especially if you're only locally oriented, right? But it is something that we can do, and we're going to talk about these fears today and hopefully address all of them. You may wonder, with the niche that you have in mind, if there's enough of an audience to make it viable, okay? And especially locally, there may not be. You may wonder if there's enough nationally. And we'll show you how to address that and how to figure that out before you get started. You may actually feel alone in leaving the traditional therapy crowd, okay? If you embark on this national journey of becoming the expert in something narrow, you are, in fact, leaving the crowd behind. And you're going to have to work on making sure you get enough support for yourself, making sure that you make enough contacts in other areas. You may be fearful of going national. You have to be pretty visible, right, if you're going to go national. Now, this is just something that's part of it. April will talk about that quite a bit. I've had to do the same thing. I've had to go national. There's not enough therapists in my area, even though there's quite a few in Boulder and Denver. But in order to really make a big business out of it, I have to go national. And as all of you probably know, I do a lot of webinars. I'm pretty visible, but I'm also a pretty shy person, actually. And so I do a lot of fulfilling of my own time alone, and that's just what you have to do, okay? I make sure I replenish myself that way. So these are some fears that folks typically have when they think about this idea of becoming a national expert in something, and we're going to address these today. So what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to have April talk about her journey in creating her own niche and making it work. And then once she goes through that and talks about all those things, I'm going to chime in with giving you a tip on the first thing that you need to do in considering a narrow niche. You need to make sure that you are going to have enough of an audience, and that's what I'll talk to. And then I'll just kind of summarize and give you 4 steps to take to market yourself and be successful in this way. So April is going to talk about shopping addiction, compulsive buying, of course. She's first going to talk about how she got interested in this niche. She's then going to share with you the challenges that she had in the beginning, and I'm sure she's going to address some of the things that you're afraid of. She's then going to talk about how she overcame those challenges, what she had to do to break through there. And then she'll talk about how she markets herself today. All right, so I'm pretty much going to turn it over to April at this point. April?
I am here, and it sounds like you want me to begin by saying something about how I got interested in this topic.
Yes.
And it actually had to do with the closing of my favorite store in 1993, and a childhood experience that I had with shopping. It had to do with the disparity I saw between the way my mother and I shopped and the way my next door neighbor and her daughter shopped, and even more so, my next door neighbor's relationship with shopping and with a particular store. And even though I was very young, somehow I got the idea that when I was older, I wanted to find a store and have the kind of relationship with the people in that store and, of course, the clothing that this next door neighbor of mine did. And so that's really what happened to me in my 20s. And this particular store was right down my block, and I shopped there for 20 years. And I really felt as though my relationship with the store and the people in it helped me actually to heal some emotional wounds that related to my relationship with my mother and my mother's feelings about having and spending. And so I began to think that there was really a little more to shopping than met the eye. And so I did some workshops in 1994, end of 93, called When Shopping Heals. And I started to talk about my experience. And one particular time that I did a workshop, someone in the audience was there who happened to be a writer for New York Magazine, and unbeknownst to me, he was writing a story. And so the next month I got a call from a friend who said, "Your workshop's in New York Magazine." And the title was even kind of tongue-in-cheek, "Shop Till You Actualize," because I talk about shopping as a vehicle for self-expression, self-definition, creativity, and even, as in my case and what I felt, some healing. So one thing led to another, and an editor from a publishing house called me after reading that in New York Magazine, and I got a contract to write a book. But still, this was not about compulsive buying. It was really about shopping as a process of search, not necessarily related to buying or having. We use that word metaphorically. I'm shopping for a mate, I'm shopping for a lifestyle. And so I began to really see what shopping, when you take it away from goods and services, really can mean. Anyway, eventually, kind of 3 months into the book, my contract was canceled. I couldn't get another one. And so I ended up backing into what I call the dark side, which is the negative side about shopping, and that's shopping done to excess. And in order to really learn a lot about compulsive buying, I did an exhaustive study of the research, and I turned that exhaustive study into my first book. I Shop, Therefore I Am, Compulsive Buying and the Search for Self, which is an edited book. And at the time it was published in 2000, it was the first book in the English language about compulsive buying disorder. There was nothing about this. So it's not as though I didn't have my own compulsive buying past. I did. And for me, it had to do more with the expenditure of time and energy than any serious financial difficulty I got into. Also, since 1979, I had been working with people with eating disorders. I was what is sweetly referred to as the founding mother of the Center for the Study of Anorexia and Bulimia in New York. And shopping and buying are two ways that women traditionally negotiate the ups and downs of life. So my interest in eating disorders certainly fueled my interest in this topic. So that is really my story, how I got into this. I was trained as a traditional psychodynamic psychotherapist, and in my work with eating disorders, I saw how many other kinds of modalities increasingly were being used. By the time I transferred from eating disorders to compulsive buying, the field of eating disorders had just ballooned. Whereas in 1979, I was really one of the lone wolves, and we, as a clinic, were the first outpatient eating disorders clinic in the country. By 1994, when I moved into shopping addiction, eating disorders study and treatment was all over. This has not happened yet with shopping addiction. And I think part of it is because we smile upon it. Consumption fuels our economy. And so it has been a, pardon the pun, hard sell to therapists.
I didn't know some of that. That's really interesting. I didn't know some of your story, even though we've been working together all these years.
So I edited this book, and after the book came out, people started calling me for treatment, and I began to develop, little by little, a treatment program, which I'll tell you a little bit about more. But the last bullet point on this card, actually, Becky, we can go to the next one.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. The last bullet point on this card, other therapists not realizing that it was an issue. Overspending is the American and increasingly the global way. You may remember that after 9/11, President Bush said, Mrs. Bush and I, we cannot let the terrorists frighten our nation. Mrs. Bush and I want Americans to go shopping. It would have been absurd for him to say drinking or drugging, but shopping, yes. And, we think of, there's a Post-it a friend gave me. Whoever said money can't buy happiness just didn't know where to shop. We have these tongue-in-cheek disease names: affluenza, appendicitis, luxury fever. We don't have that about other addictions. So, because it is something that comes out often indirectly in treatment rather than directly, unless someone is contacting me because they know this is my specialty. But for a traditional therapist who may not even ask about issues related to money in their initial intake sessions, it comes out indirectly. Somebody can fall behind paying the bill. Somebody comes to the session dressed in something different every week. Somebody comes with lots of shopping bags, that kind of thing. So there is a lot that conspires to keep it hidden. Becky, you can go on to the next slide now.
Okay.
So one of the things I did early on was I did do some workshops in some psychotherapy training programs here in New York. But one of the things that early on that really began a breakthrough was to find another field that was dealing with this issue. And those of you who have watched Hoarders or know about hoarding know that excessive acquisition can be an enormous problem. And one of the organizations, the national organizations that deal with both excessive acquisition, difficulty discarding, clutter, is now called the Institute for Challenging Disorganization. It used to be called the National Study Group for Chronic Disorganization and the National Association of Professional Organizers. Both of these organizations were just thrilled to learn that a psychologist was dealing with this issue because so many of their clients had this issue and they were finding their own tools and methods inadequate to deal with some of the psychological issues. So I've done teleclasses for the Institute for ICD. I've spoken at conferences for Institute for Chronic Disorganization and hope to speak at the National Association of Professional Organizers next year. I've done a keynote at the Association for Financial Counselors, Planners, and Educators. So none of these are therapists, but they are all very eager to hear what I have to say. Although in the early 2000s, I remember saying, oh, I don't want to have a website. I did bite the bullet, and in 2003, developed a website, which we work on continuously. We revamped it, I believe, twice, and I started developing an individual practice. And then I decided I wanted to run small groups. And so as I was engaging in my individual practice and deciding to run small groups, I started putting a treatment program together using things that I knew had been helpful in working with people with eating disorders and things that were evidence-based for other addictions: motivational interviewing, cognitive behavior therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and mindfulness. I also began to train therapists, and I have done a number of trainings over the years and also done some workshops for therapists and hope to speak at the Psychotherapy Networker conference next year. I began to get media coverage because when we launched the program in 2005, I sent out a press release, and also because I had this book that had come out in 2000, I was more Googleable, and at the time there were not very many therapists, and actually there really still aren't, but there was media coverage. And so I've been on the Today Show and Good Morning America and things like that, CBS Evening News and the Nightly Business News, and in lots of print publications, done a lot of radio shows, and I wrote some book chapters, I wrote some articles. Becky, would you mind advancing to the next slide, please?
No problem.
Okay, the big thing for me was trained as a psychologist. One of the cornerstones of our training is research, and I felt, even though I saw how people were doing based on this 12-session training that I had developed, I needed to see objectively, and I wanted the field to see objectively, if the program really worked. So in 2010, I designed a research study with some colleagues, which was a randomized control study of people who, compulsive buyers, all of whom had the same inclusion and exclusion criteria. They had to score in the compulsive buying range on a standard psychological instrument. They couldn't be have active substance abuse. They couldn't be psychotic. They couldn't be suicidal. They could be on medication as long as the dosage hadn't changed for 6 months. And they could be in psychotherapy as long as the psychotherapy wasn't specific to compulsive buying. So we did that study, and as of last week, the results have been published, and you will be getting an email from us which will have a link to free access to that study if you have any interest. And this is one of the places where I want to pitch that I hope some of you have an interest in this area. I know some of you do, because some of you are here because you're on the list of therapists that either I've trained or have downloaded the therapist assessment. But I want to say that this is a field that is really wide open, and it's a very widespread problem. Conservatively, 5.8% of the U.S. population have compulsive buying disorder. That is over 17 million people. But as I said, we need to educate the public. Recently, we heard that there is a documentary about a 12-year-old shopaholic. So what we are learning and hearing about this disorder is that it is being glorified in young people, and it's really very, very serious. The consequences, there have been suicides linked to debt where college students have left their credit card bills along with their suicide notes. I worked with the first compulsive buyer who was arrested and whose defense, she had the first compulsive buying disorder defense in the nation. There are people who are incarcerated for embezzling funds, and of course the toll on relationships is enormous. Divorces, family friction, bankruptcy. You know, there are very serious consequences to this which tend to be underplayed. In the last few years, I have seen some really important changes. 2 recovering shopaholics have created a wonderful program called Shop Your Own Closet, and this is Jill Chivers' program. Jill is in Australia, and all her information is on our website, and I can even include it in the follow-up email. And she has a wonderful monthly newsletter that's not just about clothing and shopping your own closet, but also about the psychological. And Debbie Roos, who is a woman in San Diego, California, started a blog last January 2013, called Recovering Shopaholic, Trade Your Full Closet for a Full Life. And it's a wonderful, very practical, detailed blog, and she's just published an ebook, and we'll include that as well in some of the follow-up material. And there are a host of others. So that's part of the ongoing development. The project that we're very excited about right now is that we're developing a text messaging program for compulsive buyers. And this is a program which will be personalized, because everyone who signs up for it will fill out a short assessment that's unique to them and their particular problem, so that they will get messages that are both generic, messages that 80% or more of compulsive buying would need to hear, and messages that are specific to them. They'll also have the ability to text to us help when they are in the throes of the urge to splurge, and they will get back an audio recording helping to talk them off of the emotional ledge that they're on, and eventually they will get a telephone number to call that will help them access a video recording. I'm also trying to interest residential treatment programs into developing compulsive buying programs, because there's so much overlap with depression, anxiety disorders, other addictions. And that too has been something of a hard sell. I have done a training at I'm going to be doing one at the ranch, and I've done one at Sierra Tucson and the Renfrew Center, and hopefully eventually one of the programs, probably it'll be an eating disorder program, that will be the first one to reach out for me to actually do a program there. Continuing to do media interviews, and we have a social media presence. I belong to several LinkedIn groups, and we do post on a few of them. When we have an event, we do a Facebook event page, and in an ongoing way we do teleclasses. And one of the therapists I've trained, Carla McNeil, has been running the program in a small group format over the telephone twice a year now for 3 years. And that is a cost-efficient way to disseminate the program. There's a tremendous amount of camaraderie among the group, and that's something that we've really felt good about offering. The therapists who have trained with me are each listed on my website along with their contact information and fee range. So when I get emails for therapists, if I can make referrals, or I can refer the person to that page and they can take it from there. Becky, I think we can move on to the next slide.
Okay. Well, this is, I think this is the last one there.
Yes. So over the course of the 11 years, I've built an email list of over 8,000 individuals. And part of the way I've done that is with many of the ways of being present in the field that I have mentioned. And another way we've done it is to create a free self-assessment, which, as you see, is on the upper left-hand corner of that home screen. And people have an opportunity to, in the privacy of their own home or office, look at 2 valid and reliable compulsive buying instruments, score them themselves, and look at the cutoffs for what are the delineation for when, according to the research, you enter into the compulsive buying realm. By the way, what I do want to say is that the research that we did showed that participation in this program led to a statistically significant reduction in the amount of time and money spent buying compulsively, the number of compulsive buying episodes, and these results held or even improved further at the 6-month follow-up point. When they began the program, on average, the participants scored well into the compulsive buying range on these compulsive buying instruments. And at post-treatment and at 6-month follow-up, they were solidly in the normal buying range. So really, they went from compulsive buyers to normal buyers in 12 weeks. Part of what really makes this program work is the comprehensiveness of the skills, tools, and strategies that are acquired. It comes at it from cognitive, affective, and behavioral standpoints. There's a lot of accountability. And when we do this as a group, the ability to talk with other people who have this same problem tends to really diminish shame and guilt about it. It tends to really promote hope and minimizes boredom, even has some effect on loneliness because of the group structure. The groups usually email or contact each other, sometimes in between and after the group is over. When we run this as a group, there's a post-group email that's sent out each week, so we stay in touch with the group as well. We also have, for therapists, an assessment. Is your client a compulsive buyer? Assessment tools for therapists. And Becky, maybe you can...
Yeah, that's on the next, we have that on this
exactly.
next chart here. Yeah.
So we have that 3 assessment tools for therapists, which people can access free, and that helps the therapist who may have some question in the office to use with clients informally or formally. I created a 4-session audio course, and there's a link on this screen to a video about that course. That course is an overview. And by the way, I forgot well, we'll get to it, I think, in the next slide. That course is an overview of theory and treatment and kind of the state of compulsive buying, study and treatment today. I follow that up with a 12-session course, which is one that I do by telephone or in person. And that course is for people to learn to use this particular model. It has been, as I said, something of a hard sell for therapists, but I think part of the reason is that people do not normally present with this, and I think there are a lot of countertransference issues for therapists in working with compulsive buyers. For example, we are in a humanitarian profession. Some of us have some real ambivalence about money, about feeling entitled to charge for our services and charge well. Sometimes compulsive buyers who seem to spend money as though it's going out of style evoke negative feelings in us, competitiveness, envy, judgment. I think also sometimes, I think this is true of patients in general today. They find us in different ways than they used to, and they're much more shopping for therapists than they used to be. They go on the web, they look and see if there are any reviews about us, and I think that sometimes compulsive buyers feel like the therapist is just one more hired hand, one more in their stable of resource people, and that also can make for countertransference issues. So what I've just done, even I'm guilty in a way of this denial in the following respect. I have been part of an analytic training institute since 1975. That's nearly 40 years. And I have just asked the director of intake to add on the symptom checklist overspending and overshopping, so that if it's checked, the intake worker can inquire about it. And I think this is not normally asked about. So before we go on to the next slide, it also occurs to me that a non-traditional way of looking for referrals and letting people and educating people in my particular niche is going to consumer counselor credit agencies, which I've done, and those have been, again, very hospitable environments, very welcoming environments. So let's move on to the next slide.
Okay.
I forgot to mention that the program that we've now done the outcome study about was the subject of my second book, To Buy or Not to Buy, Why We Overshop and How to Stop, which came out in 2008 and has sold 17,000 copies so far. We developed these companion workbooks that you see to the right of them to go along with the exercises in the text. It is by no means mandatory, but a lot of people have enjoyed working with them, and I asked them to carry the little one with them. It's for on-the-spot recording, and it's also got on-the-spot lists, personalized lists that they create. It's where they record and evaluate each of their expenditures. So that's how those are used. The little reminder card that you see to the right is someone that everyone who orders a book or the journals gets a copy of. If you order the journals, you actually get a laminated card. If you just order the book, you get a link to download it yourself from the web. But these small things, that card comes to represent sometimes their relationship with the therapist who offered it to them in the first place. It also represents a very important activity that they can engage in that creates a space between the impulse and the action, which is what we're trying to do, to slow down the process. So that is really it for this slide. Let's go on, and I think, Becky, you're going to take over here.
Yep, I am. So good. So I think that, you know, it's so interesting to see, if we look at where you are now, this could be really, really overwhelming to someone who's just getting started with a narrow niche. But you've been involved in this for quite some time.
Yes.
And so if we look at that and we expect that we're going to be there tomorrow, that is going to be way too tall of an order. Okay, so I think the important thing is to remember that you actually started somewhere in terms of realizing how to get started, and that there was something here you were passionate about, and kind of feeling your way through. I'm imagining, April, that 10 years ago there was no way that you could have even imagined that today you would be generating a text programming for folks with this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's no way. You can't. I mean, that's my experience as well with my own growth, is that I look at some of the things we're doing today, and literally 2 years ago I had no idea that that was even possible. It was nowhere in my sights. And I think that's something for everyone to take really and realize this, because you start out and you feel your way through it, really. And successful business is not having this perfect crystal ball that you could look here and say, hey, in 6 years I'm going to be doing this. It's not that at all in my experience. It's really feeling your way through things, seeing what's next, maybe trying things and having it not work, because I've certainly done that a lot. So let's just talk about the best way to get started. Now, you don't want to start into this if there's absolutely not an audience that you can reach, okay? There's just no way that you could do that. So there are some things that you can do. One of the things that you need to do is you really need to have honest conversation with yourself about, are there really enough people suffering from this issue and needing help? And it could be with maybe the emotional aspects of another struggle that's perhaps health related, or like with April, it's related to spending money, right? It's not necessarily something that's in the DSM, but there's emotional aspects driving some behavior that is not healthy, okay, and it has negative ramifications on the person's life. So there's a lot of health things that relate to this. There's a lot of other types of behavior in the world that aren't in the DSM, but they're going to be, emotional aspects there. So really ask yourself, is this something that's pervasive visible or not to the general person, but is it pervasive enough? You can often find out if there is enough interest or recognition of this problem in order to make something successful by looking to see if there are Yahoo groups or Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups where people are talking about this issue. Okay, often these places are going to be the kind of private gathering grounds for folks who are struggling with these types of issues, and they'll start a private Facebook group or a private LinkedIn group or a Yahoo group back in the day anyway, when Yahoo was a big group environment. And I know, April, that there are Yahoo groups for compulsive shoppers. There, at least there were back then.
Yeah.
And yeah, and who knows, maybe they have moved to Facebook and LinkedIn at this point. But that is often a way that you can really tell. There could be forums. So you can do a search on these things. Go to Facebook and search under groups and see if there are groups of people who are gathering around the thing that you're interested in doing. The other thing, and this April talked about this, is, are there folks in other fields that are talking about this issue? So, and really make a list of these groups, because these are going to become your friends. So the organizers, the credit counseling people, these are people that certainly aren't necessarily related to counseling at all, but these are people that April had to reach out to, and she found a welcoming audience there, because these folks are dealing with these issues day in and day out. So what is it for your niche? What is it going to be? There's most likely tangential groups that you're going to need to reach out to and network with that are going to really help you in that realm. So this is the best way to get started, is to really make sure there's an audience. If it's something that's so off the wall and there's no gathering and there's just very few people, it's probably not going to be profitable for you. Okay, and then once you've determined that you do have something, obviously launching a website is going to be the foundational piece of marketing. I always think of the website as kind of like the hub in the middle of all the spokes that go out to all these different marketing venues potentially. If you have a site and it provides good educational information on the topic, then you're going to be able to do things like April did, like in terms of growing a list, okay? So her assessment vehicle was extremely beneficial in terms of her growing that 8,000 person list, and that's a huge list. And this is the type of thing you can do when you have a narrow specialty and you go national and international with it. So start building that list, come up with a free report, start doing maybe teleseminars, webinars, these kinds of outreach things. This is what you need to do in this mode especially. Okay, as a local therapist treating traditional things, you may not have to do these things. But if you're going to go national and educate people, you really need to do this outreach. And then go ahead and outreach to these others that are actively involved. A lot of them have events or conferences, and these were some of the first places that April was able to go speak. It wasn't at a therapy conference, okay? It was at other conferences in tangential fields where people were dealing with these issues, and that's what she did. And in fact, it seems like some of these beginning workshops was where you first got some press. And so that is something that's really going to help. And then, that leads into the press coverage. There's a couple of ways that you can enhance your ability to get press, and especially in these narrow niches. If there is, if there's an audience, then the folks in the press they're going to want to publicize what you're doing. Okay, that's a good way to tell, I guess. So there's one thing that you can do. You can subscribe to Harrow. It used to be called helpareporterout, I think, .com, but the website has changed to helpareporter.com. You can go out there and subscribe, and you can even put search terms in. So, let's just say that you were let's go ahead and say that your narrow niche was helping people who have survived cancer. So you could actually go out to helpareporter.com. You can subscribe to get all sorts of reporter requests for anything having to do with cancer recovery. or surviving cancer or anything like that. And then you're going to get notified when a reporter is looking for a story on a topic that has to do with that. And you can reply and give them, give them an article, or they can interview you as an expert in that area. That's a great way to get to really get out there. Okay. Press releases as well. Now you need to have something newsworthy for press releases, obviously. So one of the things you're going to find if you're really establishing yourself as the expert and you're pioneering a narrow niche like this is that you're probably going to develop your own program, right? You're going to develop, like April did. You're going to need to develop your own program because there isn't anything that exists to help people. And it can simply start with a workshop and the process that you would go through with people to help them in that workshop. And then, of course, April over time developed a more a more structured program and a longer program that had a lot more modalities involved and a lot more worksheets and support for people and all sorts of stuff into a 12-week program now. So that is something that she has now, but she didn't have it in the beginning. But you can start with a simple thing and use press releases. You can use press releases to talk about all sorts of different developments within your program, within your field, and it can include just that you're speaking somewhere on a certain thing. Okay, it just has to be newsworthy, and this will help you get going. Finally, you also can reach out to authors who write about this issue. So I know that originally, April, you found some other folks who were writing about it, and maybe not from the angle that you were writing about it, and then you reached out to them, and I believe that that's how you first edited your book, your first book. Is that right?
Well, what I did was I tried to learn about compulsive buying disorder, and so I did a lot of research and learned what people, not only mental health professionals, but educators, community, consumer behavior experts were saying and had written about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Okay, so there's a number of questions that are really good questions in here, and I want to go through those. And let's just see how we can answer those. So the first one that I saw is that there's different laws, for instance, in different states than maybe in New York. And some people are concerned that they wouldn't be able to legally counsel people in other states. And so that going broad would seem limiting in this context. Let me talk to that for a second, and April, you may be able to chime in as well. So there's a couple of things that you can do. There are ways of reaching different areas in your state so that you could actually treat your whole state via online counseling means. Okay, if you're licensed in the state of Colorado, there's tons of places in Colorado that are actually more rural and underserved, and that doesn't mean that people there aren't suffering from these issues. So there is a way, and you can do it very, very, very effectively with AdWords. And also, if you have such a narrow niche, you're going to be found by these people anyway, but you can reach more broadly in your state when you have a narrow niche and you're the specialist. So that's one thing. There's also a lot of folks who are in states where they can counsel across state lines, or for this, they can call themselves a coach and not be doing quote-unquote therapy, but call themselves a coach. In some states, you can't really do that without your therapy license being at risk. But in other states, it's more flexible. You can call yourself a coach, and you can coach across state lines. So this is something that you have to really understand what the limitations are with your state licensing so that you can figure that out. The other thing is, I think there's a big opportunity, especially in these niches that require a lot of education, to do psychoeducation and not have it called counseling. And April, I would say that your courses are much more psychoed than they are determined to be counseling, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, Becky. And in talking with my lawyer about these issues, we're very careful when people come into the group. There's an agreement that they sign which says very specifically, this is not mental health treatment, and that if they have a mental health issue, that's something that they need to take care of in another way. And we are very careful in the scope of what's offered and how it's described, and making it very clear that this is not psychotherapy.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So, so I think we answered two questions with that one, the whole thing about licensing and also about treating things as psychoed and covering yourself with these waivers, if you will, that it's not counseling. The other thing, somebody has a question about, Amber says, I specialize in mental health, addictions, and domestic violence treatment. There's a lot of stigma with all these specialties, especially DV treatment. How can you overcome stigma related to this type of a narrow niche? So that's, I would imagine if you specialized in DV and you did that treatment, there is a heck of a lot of stigma there. A lot of therapists avoid that like the plague. And so I'm wondering, April, if you might have an answer for that.
Well, I think psychoeducation is really part of the answer. I think that's the way that a lot of things that have been stigmatized have been, some of that stigma, little by little, is eroded by psychoeducation and by making sure that people understand how complex this is.
Yeah, yeah. So education. Yeah. Another question here is, Alex is impressed with your 8,000 member email list, and he's wondering how you leverage it into real money. So maybe you can talk about that, how you market to that list.
Okay, well, we send out broadcasts, certainly not on a weekly basis, maybe sometimes not even on a monthly basis. But in terms of money related to the list, making money with the people who are on the list, we do offer sometimes short-term 3-session courses, and the 12-session group, 2 of them run each year, and that is somewhat lucrative, at least for the therapist who does the group. It's not a tremendous amount of money. Really, the most of the money I make is from my private practice. And the private practice that I have, much of it has come from having this website and this specialty.
Yeah.
When we launch the text messaging platform, that could be a source of some nice income because it's going to be very, very inexpensive to the user, and maybe it will have a broad appeal. There is a lot of research that shows for alcoholism, drug abuse, for many kinds of problems, having a text messaging platform really helps with sobriety and abstinence.
I wonder about DV as a platform for that as well. Seems like that could be really helpful there too.
I think it could. And
Yeah.
this is just beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we are actually really close to the end of the hour. I wanted to ask if anybody else has any questions. We have about a minute and a half left here. If you have any last-minute questions, feel free to type them in, and we will answer them. It seems that there is interest in people are wanting help with narrowing their niche and talking about how to determine what their niche would be. And so that is certainly something that I will ponder if I can help you with a webinar just focused on that, how to figure out a narrow niche for yourself. And any of you who typed in information about that, go ahead and give me more thoughts on that if you want to, and I will go ahead and ponder a webinar on that topic.
Becky, there's one other comment about talking about content on website, AdWords, Psychology Today, and other ways to generate hits, and or crawling to a website with a narrow niche, where to start.
Mm-hmm. On Psychology Today?
AdWords.
Oh, yeah, everything. Right. Yeah, all sorts of outreach vehicles are possible. And people who are searching for that specific thing, if they find it, no matter where they find it, it's a perfect fit. So they're usually very interested. That's the beauty of a narrow niche, really targeting those folks. Okay, well, we are here at the top of the hour. April, I want to thank you very much for sharing all your information and your whole journey with us and basically showing folks where they could get to over time. And I really appreciate your time today.
Well, it was a pleasure, and I hope it's been helpful.
Yeah, and this webinar will be posted. We'll send the replay out. If you came in late, don't worry about missing the beginning. We'll send it out to everybody. And thank you all for attending today and for your time. Take care. We'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.